Hey y'all, I'm Mickey Gousset, and welcome to a mostly unscripted video where we're going to look at how you deal with integrating Azure Pipelines with GitHub using the Azure Pipelines GitHub app. Now, I recorded the demo already, so now I'm recording just some pre-stuff before the demo. You're also going to see my cat come walking across the desk several times during the demo, so keep a watch out for Milo. And honestly, I'm too lazy to make slides. So instead, I've got a link to the documentation on integrating GitHub with Azure Pipelines using the GitHub app. So why don't we switch over and actually look at some of that documentation, because I'm going to use this as opposed to making some slides. So you'll just have to bear with me. All right. So this link's in the bottom. First thing this talks about is, when you're coming from Azure DevOps to GitHub, and I talk about this in another video. If I remember correctly, I'll put a link up here to the other video where I talk about your organizational strategies inside of GitHub. Because you have GitHub organizations, you have Azure DevOps organizations. They are not the same thing. So this first section in the documentation starts to lay out some different options for when you're moving from Azure DevOps to GitHub, how to map things basically from Azure DevOps to GitHub. And I agree with some of it. I don't necessarily agree with all of it, but there's some information in here on how to do that. In general, on the GitHub side, we recommend you have as few organizations as possible. So that means you're going to potentially take multiple team projects and combine them all into one organization. So you'll need to take into account things like repository naming. You'll need to take into account access, that kind of stuff. I'm not going to go through all this in that video, but feel free to read through this. If you've got a question about this or a comment, I'd love to hear it. Hit me up on X, which I use infrequently. Send me an email. I'm Mickey Gousset at github.com, and I'm happy to try to answer any questions. Or if you want to see an actual detailed video that dives into this more, I could probably put that together at some point. But you need to figure out, if you're going to start moving from Azure DevOps to GitHub, organizations in GitHub are not a one-to-one match to an organization in Azure DevOps. Now, what I've seen some people do is an organization in GitHub, they match it to a team project in Azure DevOps. That's also not a good idea, because then you get organization sprawl on the GitHub side. So there's a happy medium in there that you need to do your due diligence to figure out how you're going to set things up. So this is just more talking about the organization roles, user roles, GitHub repository roles. There's 3 different ways to grant access to Azure Pipelines to the GitHub app. I've got an older video out there that talks about the OAuth way, but what we're going to talk about is the GitHub app way. You could also use a personal access token, but please don't. Please don't use a personal access token, because if Mickey uses his personal access token and then Mickey wins the lottery and, says, see ya, then anything linked to my personal access token, the moment my account gets deactivated, is going to break. So don't do that. So instead, what we're going to talk about in the demo is some GitHub app authentication. So there's a lot of details in the documentation here, but basically we're going to use the GitHub app to integrate with Azure Pipelines to GitHub. What's nice about using the GitHub app to do this is you now get checks, which means that you can display build, test, code covered results inside of GitHub. You can see that information inside of GitHub. You can create repository rule sets that can block a pull request based off of the results from the Azure pipeline. So the GitHub app is the way to go. Now, this section is going to talk to you all about the permissions that you need to be able to set this thing up, right? Now, for me, I'm an organizational owner in GitHub. I was a project collection admin in my organization in Azure DevOps, so I had all the rights that I needed. But you're probably going to want to read through this in a little more detail if you don't have those rights, so that you know the permissions that you're going to need to be able to install this. There's also a troubleshooting app section where if it's not working, it gives you a couple of ideas for why the install might not be working. And then they talk about the OAuth authentication, which you can also use, but I'm not as much of a fan of. And then you could also use personal access tokens. Not a fan. I wouldn't use those either. And then we get into, once you get the app installed, how do you actually use it, right? And honestly, once you get the app installed, it just kind of works. So this talks through the fact, whether you're using YAML or classic pipelines, the Azure Pipelines app is going to work with both, and you can use it to trigger, CI. You can use it to trigger on pull requests. Just like with GitHub, there's commands you can put into the comments to be able to just skip the CI process if you want to. But if you should care about all these details, especially around security. So I highly recommend you read them. But we're just going to go ahead and jump over to a demo of actually installing and using the app. Okay, so we got dogs in the window over there that you might be able to see, or a cat, or both actually, dogs and cats in the windows. So we've already talked a little bit about the Azure Pipelines app and like permissions that it needs, in general, how it works. So now we're just going to dive into a demo of actually setting this thing up. Okay. So first step in setting this up is I need to make sure I know what repositories I want to provide it access to. I need to make sure I have an organization to install the GitHub app in. So we're going to be using my Mickey Gousset org organization, and I have an Azure Pipelines. We have a cat coming to help us. I have an Azure Pipelines team project and specifically repository already that I want to use. So let me go pull that up real quick, just so you can see it. So this is my Azure Pipelines, or this is my Azure DevOps team project, Mickey Security Demos, and then I have my organization is Mickey Security Demos, and I have specifically, I am trying to work and pet a cat at the same time. It's not working very well. Milo, buddy, I need you to move a little bit. Thanks. So this is my team project, Security Demos. Now, if we look at my team project, just to show you up front, we've got some pipelines in this team project, some of which are YAML pipelines, some of which are classic pipelines. So we're going to look at how we can integrate both of those with GitHub using the Azure Pipelines app. And I also want to show you that if we go to project settings and we go under pipelines and we go to service connections, I have an old service connection that I had there previously. So let's just delete that so that we're starting completely fresh. All right. So we have no service connections. Nothing is set up. We're doing all of this from scratch. Milo, buddy. Milo, buddy, come on now. I'm going to leave all of that in there just for y'all. So first step in all of this is we need to go install the Azure Pipelines app. Now, we've already gone over some of the permissions and stuff that you need. I'm an organizational owner on my organization in GitHub. I'm a project collection admin over here in my organization in Azure DevOps. So I have all the permissions that we need. Otherwise, you need to make sure you have the appropriate permissions. All right, so I'm going to come out here and go to github.com/marketplace. Now, the GitHub Marketplace is where you can do things like mess with our large language models that we have out there for people to play with. We have Copilot extensions, we have GitHub Actions, and we have GitHub Apps. So I'm going to search through the GitHub Apps. So let me select GitHub Apps, and I'm going to say All Apps. And then up here, I will do, in case you're sneezing, that is Milo in the background. He has a little bit of a cold. And I'm going to do a search for Azure Pipelines. So you can see I have a couple of different Azure Pipelines apps. This is the one you want. This is the one you want. There's 2 or 3 different ways to connect to Azure Pipelines. And in fact, you'll find an old video that I did where I talked about doing OAuth applications. But if you're going to really connect your Azure Pipelines to your GitHub repositories, this is the app you want to use. So I'm going to click that, and it's going to take me into, gives me more details about the app. We can see that it's verified. It was built by Microsoft. It's free. Gives us, well, hey, look, Milo came back. Gives us some information related to the application. And to get started, I need to install it. So you install this application at the organization level. So I'm going to select my organization, which was Mickey Gousset org, and I'm going to click install. So the first thing you have to decide is, do you want to allow this Azure Pipeline app to access all repositories in your organization or only certain repositories in your organization? You can change this, and we'll look at how you can change this, but we're going to start by just saying only select repositories. Okay, don't know how good this cut was. We'll see. So what we want to do is only select the specific repository that I care about. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to search for security, because the security demos repository, I've already taken my repository from Azure DevOps and moved it over. So now we just want to link to that, or just allow access to that repository from the Azure Pipeline. And it shows you the permissions that it's going to need, and I'm going to click install. This now redirects you over to the Azure DevOps side of the house. So I need to log in. And I'm going to, Milo, need you to move, buddy. I'm going to go to, I think it was my security, Mickey security demos, and then my security demos project. So those are the two. So I'm going to this organization and this project, and I'm going to click continue. Then it's going to ask me, are you going to authorize Azure Pipelines to act on your behalf and to do this? And so I'm going to say, sure. I authorize you. Now you're not done yet though, because it hasn't actually created the service connection for you. If you go back to and look at the service connections for this team project, if I do a refresh, you can see the service connection is not actually created for you yet. That's one of the gotchas that you need to be aware of. You actually have to at least select a repository here. This is walking you through the process of trying to get you to create a basic pipeline. And you could do that if you want to, but you at very least have to select a repository. In this case, I have access to that one repository because that's the only one I gave it access to. And once you select that repository, then the normal Azure Pipelines process is you can start configuring your pipeline. But if we come back over here and look, we can now see that it has created the service connection for us. And it names the service connection the same name as your organization. Now, one of the things you'll want to be aware of when you're looking at the service connection is you can see things like there's usage history information here, but you can't actually make any changes. If I click the edit button, then it shows you that, sorry, you can't make any changes. And that's because this is tied back to the Azure Pipeline application. You can, by the way, through security, do things though, like share this connection with other team projects. You could share it with other pipelines. So you could just install it once and then share it with multiple teams if you wanted to, or you could go into, you can go through the process of setting up a service connection for each team project, however you want to do it. But we have our service connection now. So I'm not going to keep building this. What I'm going to do instead is we've got our service connection. So let's go do a couple of things. Let's go see if we can make this actually work. All right, so we're going to come back out to our pipelines. And you can see that I had a secret scanning pipeline. And I cloned it. If you look at this one, this is an actual pipeline that is a classic pipeline. So first off, let me clean up a couple of things real quick just to make it a little bit nicer. So we'll come back out here to all pipelines, and let's take the one that we cloned, and let's just get rid of it. That way it's out of the way. Beautiful. So this is our secret scanning pipeline. If we look at our secret scanning pipeline and we go to edit it, we can see that it is a classic pipeline. Boom, classic pipeline. I like that. I'm okay with that. Classic pipelines are good. Classic pipelines, you know, I've gotten used to YAML, but classic pipelines with a GUI was how we used to do things, you know, for a while there before we had the whole YAML aspect of things. So how do we change our pipeline then to use our service connection? Well, we can come in here to the pipeline, we can go to Get Sources, and we can change it to use the GitHub source. And by default, it's going to select the service connection that you've created. So if you had other service connections, you could change those, but by default, it selected that service connection. So now I need to come in here and I need to point it to the appropriate GitHub repository. Now in this case, I've only got one. If I had more than one that I put in the app, then I could search through those. But I'm going to select that repository. And then you can see we're doing things like I'm doing this off of the main branch, and looks good. Pretty basic for the most part. If we look at triggers, right now we can see we had set this to just run manually, but I'm going to enable this on continuous integration. So I'm basically going to say anytime I push to the main branch, I want this workflow to run. So whenever I push to the main branch, I want this workflow to run. Perfect. So let's save these changes. And change to point to GitHub. All right. So at this point, we should be pointing to GitHub, which means if I go make a change on the GitHub side and push that change, we should see this pipeline, at the very least, kick off. So let's see what we see. So let's come back over here to our GitHub side. Let's go to our security demos. And let's just edit the README file because we can. And we're going to call this YouTube1. Commit changes. And we'll make our commit message YouTube1. We're going to push directly to main because that's what we do. All right, so I've pushed that directly to main. So if I come back out here, and it could take a few seconds. Oh, no, there it goes. Then you can see that it triggered the pipeline to run. There's our commit message there. We can see also visually that we're pointing at the GitHub pipeline. And so it looks like something failed. But it definitely ran, but it looks like something. Oh, it's still running. At least it thinks it's still running. Let's see. All right, so we're getting a warning. So obviously something is wrong with my pipeline. That's fine. I can accept that something's wrong with my pipeline. It's a new version of the task. Version 2 is deprecated. Please update to version 3. Okay, well, we can do that. But the point is, we did at least see that we triggered this thing from over here in GitHub land. And notice that it returned a check. So it thinks it completed successfully. That's interesting. So a not fail, it still marked it successfully. Okay. But because we're using the Azure pipeline, we have the ability to return those checks back, which means that we could also use those checks, say, on a pull request. And again, I'm kind of winging it here. So hold on a second. I'm finding some notes just to Make sure I do things the way I want to do it. All right, so let's try this. Let's go update this thing to version 3, and let's also change it to run on a pull request. So if we go to the pipelines, and we go to our secret scanning, and we go to edit this, let's change our Git leaks to be version 3. Configuration type, and let's go with default. Scan range, let's say all commits. All right, so we're going to go with that. But then under triggers, we're also going to enable the pull request validation trigger. So anytime we have a PR that's targeting the main branch, we are going to, we want this to appear, we want this to run. Now, how do we make it where we can make it required? We're going to do that on the GitHub side, but let's just see if we can even make this run. All right, so I'm going to save this. And then let's come back over here. And let's go back to our code. And this time, oh, there we go. Let's edit. And we'll call this YouTube PR. And we're going to commit our changes, but this time we'll update our commit message, YouTube PR. We're going to create a branch. So we'll call this branch Mickey YouTube PR. And we're going to propose our changes. So that takes us over here to where we can create a pull request. So hey, let's have Copilot generate a summary for my pull request. Why not? That'll take just a moment. Very minor. And we're going to create a pull request. So by creating this pull request, what we hopefully will see over here in just a moment is it did trigger. And you'll notice that it shows up on the pull request as well. It's called secret scanning because that's what the pipeline is. I believe the pipeline was called, was secret scanning. So yeah, the pipeline was called secret scanning. But the point is, it looks like from this vantage point, it looks like it thinks it's already finished. But the point is, you can see it showed up as a check. Because I'm using the pipeline like that, it shows up as a check. And I can click into it to view details, and it will show me the details still here in GitHub. So I can see that leaks were found, but I'm obviously don't have my pipeline set up to fail when it finds leaks. That must be the problem. So leaks were found, but it's more giving a warning, not an error. So that's why the pipeline's still showing as passed. So, but the point is, I could now, because I know the name of the check, secret scanning, if I really wanted to, I could come up here to settings. I could do this, go to rule sets. And I could create a new rule set. So, new branch rule set. And I could come all the way down to require status checks to pass, add a check. I could do a search for secret. And there's my secret scanning Azure pipeline. So now if I saved this, that would actually make that check required. So now I'm able to use the pull requests, I'm able to use the Azure pipeline running on a pull request to determine whether my pull request should be allowed to merge or not. Now, if you look in the documentation, there's a lot of other information here in the, yes, let's leave. If you look at the documentation, there's a lot of other information in the documentation around using this information, such as, we'll get on down to CI triggers. So this is talking about how we're doing the triggering. We're also talking about, there's actually keywords that you can pass in, just like you can with GitHub. There's keywords you can pass in with Azure DevOps if you don't want it to run the CI for a particular command, things like that. Lots of different ways to potentially trigger it. Now that was with, so I'm not going to go through all these, but the documentation I'll link in the comments. Now that was modifying the classic pipeline. So I also have, if I'm not mistaken, if we look at this code scanning one, this code scanning pipeline here actually points to an Azure Repos repo, and it points to this symgrep v2.yaml. Okay. So I want to change this to instead point over here into my repository and point to the symgrep v2 that's in my repository. Hey, I have an Azure Pipelines too. I wonder what's in that one. That's fine. We're going to point to the symgrep v2 that we're doing. So what I need to do is edit this pipeline. So I'm going to edit the code scanning pipeline. I mean, I could create a new one too, but I'm going to edit the code scanning pipeline. And I'm going to go to triggers, because right now it's triggering off of the Azure DevOps repository. So I'm going to go to triggers. And in triggers, wait, did I go the wrong place? There we go. Then we go to the YAML tab, and here's where you specify where the source is coming from. And just like we did with the classic pipelines, we're going to come in here to GitHub. We're going to select security demos, main branch, that's fine. All that looks good. I still want the trigger. So let's say the trigger on this one, override the YAML continuous integration trigger from here. So I don't want to override the YAML continuous integration trigger. And just because we can, we will enable it for pull requests as well. And so I'm going to save this. So if we come back out to pipelines and we go to code scanning and we go to edit, you'll notice that we're now pointing to the GitHub repo. I can edit this file from within here if I want to, or I can come over to the GitHub repository. In fact, let's go back, take this back to the general pipelines view. So let's go to pipelines here. Let's go back to the GitHub repository. Let's go to symgrep v2, and I don't really want to change anything here. And we'll do trigger. Let's edit this. And it's been a while since I've done Azure Pipeline, so you'll have to forgive me if I screw it up. We'll say trigger main. Commit the changes. So because I have that box unchecked over on Azure Pipelines, that means I have to have it set here correctly to trigger. So hopefully this is set to, this is going to trigger when we push the main branch. So we push the main branch. Back over here in Azure Pipelines, if we go to code scanning, there's our push right there. So if we go into this run, we can see that here's the job. It's queuing up right now. We are pointing to the GitHub repository. And we'll let this run just a second and see what happens. And as we can see, it completed successfully. If we come back over here and look at the commit, we'll actually see there should be a check on the commit where it completed successfully. And then my code scan, my secret scanning even ran as well. Okay, so what we've done so far, just to reset, and if I have a couple of weird edits in here, I apologize because I kind of went down a rabbit hole and it didn't go anywhere, so I tried to remove it. Is we installed the Azure Pipeline in our organization and we gave it access to one repository, and then we went over and configured our service connection appropriately and configured the service connection in our team project. What if we want to modify the Azure Pipeline to give it access to more than one repository? Well, let's see if we can figure that out. So since we install this at the organization level inside of GitHub, we'll go to the organization level and we'll go to settings. And down on the left-hand side, under GitHub Apps, we can see all the different GitHub apps that I have installed in this organization. Apparently, I've been playing around with some stuff. But here's the Azure Pipelines app right there. So we want to configure the Azure Pipelines app. 1 second. So let's click configure. And if we scroll down, you can see that right now we are set to only access one repo. So I could come in here and I could add some more repositories. Or I could come in here and say all repositories. So let's say I want to add all repositories. Then I could change this to be all repositories. And I could click save. And then this is going to redirect me over to the Azure DevOps side. Where I could either connect to a new team project and organization and create a service connection, or I could just go back to the one that I already had and click continue. Now this will be interesting because, we already have the service connection there. But if you'll remember, we had to go through all the way through clicking a repository before it created the service connection initially. So I wonder if from an updating standpoint, we have to do that. So what if we just stop right here, right? If we come back out over to our pipelines and we go to, say, our secret scanning pipeline, and we go to edit it, and we go to get sources, so we don't have to keep going. As you can see, it already has all of the pipelines that I granted it access to. So we don't have to keep going at that point. With what we were doing over here, we could stop at this point because just by making the change we made on the GitHub side, I wonder if we even had to go all the way through. Well, let's try that, right? So if we go to github.com/mickeygousset.org and we go to settings for this. This will be fun. Let's try this. We go to settings and we go down to GitHub Apps and we go to configure the GitHub app, and let's change this to only be select repositories, and let's select the security repository that we had before, but let's also select actions testing. So 2 repos. So I wonder if we just click save here, and it takes me to this screen, but I'm not going to do anything yet on that screen, right? What we're going to do is come back over here to pipelines, and we'll do a quick little refresh because we can. And if we go to this pipeline and we go to edit this pipeline, If we're going to change the repository, awesome, look at that. We didn't even have to go through the rest of this. All we had to do was make the change on the GitHub side, and then our service connection was automatically updated, which is honestly exactly what you would expect. Now, so I've created this service connection now, and I have in this one team project, right? So if we go to the settings for this team project, we can go to service connections, and there's my service connection. So what if I have another team project that I want to be able to do a pipeline in? I think I only have one team project in this organization right now. So let's go back to the organization level. Yeah, I've got one team project. So let's create a new team project real quick. And we're going to call this the Please Work team project. And we'll make it private and and that's fine. And we're going to click create. And this will take just a moment. So the question becomes, I have this new team project. I want to create a new pipeline to access my GitHub repositories. How do I do that? Well, you have two ways you could do that. The first way you could do that is, let's come back out here to github.com/GitHub.com/MickeyGousset.org. Is I could come in here into settings, and if I go to GitHub Apps, what logically would make sense to me is I'd come over here to Configure. And I want to get to that next stage where I'm being able to configure stuff on the Azure DevOps side. So I got to make some kind of change in here. Even if it's just go to all repositories and then go back to the same repositories I had selected and then click Save. But that tricks it enough, for lack of a better word, to where now I can come over here. I can log in to Azure DevOps. I can select my security, and I can now select my Please Work project. If I click continue, and if we go look over here in my Please Work project, and we go to project settings, and we go to service connections, you'll see I don't have a service connection there. So I can, select a repository. And now, if we go back and look, I now have a service connection. It's called the same thing as the other service connection in the other team project because it names it after the repository. But this is one way I can go about doing this, and that is I can configure the service connection for each team project. Honestly, though, probably an easier way, and if you use our GitHub Enterprise Importer tool, there's actually a way to have it automatically rewire your pipelines for you using this way, but I've never really tried it, but it is there. So if we kill this, and now we see that there's no service connection. If we go back over to our security demos service connection, and I go to the security for it, then in theory, I can share this service connection with my Please Work team project as well. And I'll click OK. So now I'm sharing that service connection with the Please Work team project. So now let's go back to our Please Work team project. And now we can see that there is the shared service connection. Can't edit it, obviously, but there's the shared service connection that's being shared to me from the other team project. So I go to Pipelines, and I go to create a new pipeline. And I say, let's do GitHub Pipelines. So here, it's wanting me to actually create an OAuth connection as well, so it could then let me access any of the other repositories and things that I can access, I mean, that's okay. I'm okay doing that. If I click cancel, let's see what happens. Okay, something went wrong, which makes sense. All right, so if instead of clicking cancel, and I'm sorry I got a bunch of stuff grayed out, but somewhere in here, we can see our Mickey Gousset org. It's right here. All right, so I need to make a note. Hey, sorry, it's an editing note. 12, gray some stuff out. So it wants to set up an OAuth connection for me initially. So it didn't try to use the shared service connection yet. And so I'm going to say, okay, to create this OAuth connection for me. But I don't want to connect as me. Okay? So you can see it's trying to connect as me, trying to show my repositories. Hopefully remember to gray all that nonsense out. But what I want instead is if I scroll all the way to the bottom, I can instead say, hey, use a specific connection. So I'm going to click use a specific connection. And I want to use this connection. And then by using that connection, it now just gives me the repositories that team project has access to. Now, what this has now done, though, is it has created an OAuth connection for my user. So anytime I come in here to create a new pipeline, and I say do it from GitHub, based off of whatever my access is. So that's where you have to remember to scroll to the bottom and select use a specific connection. I wonder. Nope, that wouldn't work either. But there you go. That's what you've got to do if you want to add or modify the repositories the service connection can access, as well as if you want to be able to either create new service connections in other team projects or share service connections across team projects. Just remember, it's probably going to tell you, try to do that OAuth connection for you, where then you'll want to, whenever you go to create a repository, scroll down all the way to the bottom and select specific connection in order to make this work. Now, that was with the shared connection. If I come back over to security demos, let's try one more thing. If I come back over to security demos and I go to pipelines and I say create a new pipeline, and I want to create a GitHub pipeline, GitHub YAML pipeline. All right, so it is still trying to, because I have that OAuth, it is trying to use that OAuth. So I would have to, again, scroll down here and select specific connection. Is there a way to get around that? Maybe. I don't know. I really don't know if there's a way to make it where it doesn't create that OAuth connection and instead just, allows me to just see a list of service connections. If you know more about Azure Pipelines than I do, because you probably do, because I haven't really used it in several years, I'd be interested to know if there's a way to make it where it doesn't automatically try to create an OAuth connection for me to show all my repos versus all I want it to use is the Azure Pipelines app. Because otherwise, what's going to happen is you got to be careful, because you don't want to come out here, create a new pipeline and just go, okay, GitHub. Oh, look, here's my repos. So I'm just going to select a repo. And then now you've made that connection using OAuth, not using the Azure Pipelines app. And you want to use the Azure Pipelines app. When you're going to do a wrap-up video like this, the ending video, it helps if you punch the record button, because I just went through my entire spiel and realized I didn't punch the record button. So let's see if I can remember what I want to tell you, which is, there you go. We have done the initial integration between Azure Pipelines and GitHub. And it wasn't that difficult as long as you have the rights that you needed to be able to access both GitHub and Azure DevOps during the process. So next up, well, first off, I'll be interested in your feedback on this, right? So we covered the basics. It's definitely going to get you started, but I'd love some feedback from you on, give this a try and what questions do you have? Send me an email at mickeyusay@github.com. Hit me up on X or leave a comment on this video, and I'll try to answer those questions or maybe even make another video to help answer those questions. Next up for me is probably going to be to do the same thing, but with Azure Boards. So there's an Azure Boards app that you can use to integrate Azure Boards with GitHub. So we're going to look at how you can install that app and look at the basics of how that app would work. Now, I'm really interested in your feedback on this, on the channel, looking for other topics to create as well. I got 3,500 subscribers. I'm very excited. I'm hoping to get to 5,000 by the end of the summer. We'll see. I got to get some more content out there to make that happen. If you like the video, though, please click the little like button and please subscribe to the channel. All of that, you will not believe how much that helps expand the number of people that can see the videos. Leave comments on the video. If you've got questions, I'll try to answer them, or as I said, reach out to me in different ways. I'm going to try to get an Azure Boards video out here in the next few days, and then just keep creating content. I actually think I'm going to start creating some Copilot content. So one of the things we just announced at Build last week was Copilot coding agent. I think that's what it's called. And I played with that a little bit today, and it's really cool. So I want to kind of show you what I've been getting into there as well. So anyway, let me know what you want. Let me know what you think. Let me know what you think about the channel. Let me know what kind of content you might want to see. Thanks for watching.